Hey everybody, and welcome back to Motherhood is Wild podcast. I'm your host, Jaylena, and I'm really looking forward to today's episode. If you've been following along on my main channel, Leave Her Wild, you might know a little bit about today's topic beforehand. So I really wanted to, at some point, do this episode, and I wasn't really sure when it was going to happen. I'm still working out kinks, trying to figure out how I really want to do guest episodes. So that's something I'm really taking my time with because I want to get it right. So until then, it's just going to be me and you. I'm also working on another, I don't know what I would call it, another series within this series, which I'm thinking about. So I really want to hear what you guys think about a new episode every week. On Wednesdays, it'll be Wildly Off Topic Wednesdays, and I'll be able to use this platform to talk about anything. It doesn't have to pertain to being a mom. It could just be about life or, just anything in general. And I could have guests on that episode weekly as well as, I won't always have a guest for that, but that is something that I'm thinking about doing weekly. So let me know if that is something you guys might be interested in, because that might be happening pretty quickly, maybe even this month. With this build being pretty much done, I'll have a little bit more time on my hands before Ember gets here to put in another episode if I want to. So that's something to look forward to. And I guess let's just get started talking about today's subject. So, like I said, if you follow along on Leave Her Wild, you might already be aware of the pregnancy scare that Isaac and I faced. If you haven't already watched the very first episode of this podcast series, feel free to go do so. I explain a lot more in depth about my fertility journey and why I didn't think that I was able to have kids. So when I got pregnant, it was a bit of a surprise. And we were not necessarily afraid. It was just so unexpected that we were just kind of taken aback and surprised. And, once it kind of set in, we were both really excited. And we were really looking forward to finding out the gender. I feel like Isaac probably wanted a boy more than a girl at first, just because I feel like he might worry about having a little girl more than he will about having a little boy. And I knew from pretty much the day I found out that I was pregnant, when I took the pregnancy test, I knew it was a girl. I told everyone that. That's a whole story in itself, maybe something I'll get into in a later episode, but I had a feeling it was a girl. And so we were basically just really excited to find out if we were going to have a boy or a girl. And I know that with blood tests, you're able to tell sooner than you would through just like a normal ultrasound. So on that visit, they couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl or not. And they talked to us about DNA testing for any possible conditions that she might have. And so we opted to do the DNA testing more so than anything else so that we could find out the gender sooner. I didn't really expect anything abnormal to come back. And so I am glad that we did the DNA testing because it really opened my eyes. And that's why I wanted to discuss the topic on this episode and kind of further explain myself on that and why I will always advocate that you do DNA testing. And so they were like, oh, it should show up online. We'll get back to you in about a week, but it should show up online within a few days. It takes like 48 hours for the blood to be processed. And so, yeah, just check online. So we were super excited, and immediately as soon as that 48 hours are up, we were checking every hour, every day, trying to hopefully see the gender. We were going to be surprised at first, which I don't know who I thought I was kidding, but there was no way that I could wait till she was born to find out the gender. Looking back on it now, it feels like it was so long ago that had happened, that we were waiting. But we wound up waiting and waiting and waiting, and the results just like never showed up for, I think, 2 weeks. And apparently I had some issues with my cell phone. For some reason during this time was having a lot of issues with people trying to call me, and so every time that the doctor would try to call, it would go straight to voicemail. And I don't know if she wasn't leaving a voicemail or if I just wasn't receiving, or I wasn't getting notifications that I had a voicemail. But all in all, there was a big she couldn't reach me, and I just thought that they weren't calling, and we were getting pretty nervous. And so there's that, and we were just getting really anxious. And finally, I think it did show up that the results were in, but that I needed to talk to the doctor. And so that really did make us even more anxious. And so when I talked to her, she basically was like, it's showing that there's a pretty high chance that your daughter is going to have, well, she said, your baby is going to have Turner syndrome. And she said, Turner syndrome is, this, and it only happens to girls. So in a roundabout way, that was her telling us that it was a girl, but also kind of giving us some not so great news. Before I continue, well, I guess actually, before I explain what that is, I will say that I didn't know what that was. And so she kind of explained it to me very quickly, nothing too in depth. And obviously, once that phone call was done, we both started doing a lot of research. I know that explaining it to Isaac was kind of tough on him, just especially because his last name is Turner, and so he kind of felt like, I don't know, what are the odds? And I know that he felt guilty, not that he should have any reason to feel guilty, but he did, and that was really hard for both of us. And so we just did a deep dive into what Turner syndrome is, and it kind of just got scarier from there. So our next doctor appointment was supposed to be the 3D ultrasound or 4D ultrasound, and she wound up telling us that's not going to happen, that I needed to go see a specialist and do an ultrasound there for them to check for characteristics in the ultrasound for Turner syndrome. So we were really excited about doing the 3D ultrasound, or I don't know if it was 3D or 4D, I don't remember. But we were so excited for that, and it was just like we got this big bombshell that kind of just blew our world up a little bit. And deep diving into what Turner syndrome is there's two types, and there's classic and there's mosaic. And mosaic, well, we'll start with classic. Classic Turner syndrome is it obviously only happens to girls, and it affects your physical features. You can be born with like deformed body parts, but that's pretty rare. Usually it's like a wider neck and short stature is like the big things. And so that's what they check for abnormalities in the ultrasound, specifically like usually there's a big sac on the neck, which indicates Turner syndrome. And then also they could see other deformities too in the arms, in the legs, and swelling and stuff like that. So there is classic Turner syndrome, and then there is also mosaic Turner syndrome, which pretty much only doesn't necessarily affect your physical features as much. It's usually just your stature, and then it also does affect your ability to reproduce. And so we did the ultrasound. Oh, and what was so scary is that 99% of babies diagnosed with Turner syndrome are stillborn or miscarried. So that was what scared us the most, was finding out that she may never make it. And so at first, when we finally not accepted, but when we finally when it finally set in that we were going to be parents, and we were so excited about it because it was such a surprise. It was like this miracle that happened for us, and then to have it seemingly possible for it to be ripped away from us, it was kind of a dark time for the both of us. And I'm super grateful for Isaac, and I would not want to go through this with anybody else, but that was scary for us, and we kind of just did not know what to feel or what to do at this point, and so we just had to wait. So we did just that, and we waited until our ultrasound with the specialist, which Isaac did come with me to. We had to meet with a counselor who talks about DNA testing and all kinds of stuff pertaining to that. And so we finally did the ultrasound, and the good news in that was that she wasn't showing any signs of the classic Turner syndrome. And so the thing with Turner syndrome, the reason why it came back that she could have that is because Turner girls are born with, because girls have two X chromosomes, and Turner girls have either just one or partially, one and a partial of the other. So they could only find one in the blood test. And in the blood test, they test my blood because as the baby grows, her DNA sheds and goes into my bloodstream. And so that's what they're testing essentially. And they could only find one X chromosome. So without the Y means it's not a boy, but without the other X means that it's a girl, probably with Turner syndrome. And so They did that ultrasound and it looked good. She didn't have any signs of classic Turner syndrome. But the thing is that just because she didn't have any physical signs doesn't mean she doesn't have it. So they were like, basically this is great news. And if you want to know for sure, we can do an amniocentesis test. And that test will test her DNA directly. So they take a big old needle and they poke your stomach and they take out the amniotic fluid from the sac and they test that, which is her DNA. The thing with that is there's always a possibility of a miscarriage with the amniocentesis test. Now, the doctor who we saw, the specialist, reassured us that he has done many tests, amniocentesis tests in his time, that he's been working there since the 70s, and he, hasn't ever had any issues with it, but they do have to warn us about the risks. Now, when my sister was pregnant with one of her kids, she was told that her baby might have Down syndrome. So she did the amniocentesis test too, and her kid wound up not having Down syndrome, and she did do that test though. So with all the information that we had been given, it was definitely not an easy choice to make, but we were both very much on the same page as to what we wanted to do. And we wound up doing the amniocentesis test because we just wanted to know for sure so that we could be prepared for whatever we had to face, if anything at all. And Isaac did go with me to do the amniocentesis test. And right before we were gonna get ready for that, the doctor had to leave for an emergency C-section. So we waited a little while, probably like an hour and a half, maybe 2. And they were like, we don't know how long it's going to be. You can either wait or we can reschedule for you to come back. And at this point, we were just like, I guess we'll just reschedule because we don't know how long it's going to be. So we did that. And unfortunately, when I had to go back, Isaac couldn't go with me. So I had to do it by myself, but it was fine. The amniocentesis test was not as painful or as bad as I thought it was going to be. I did not look at him putting the needle in. Basically, they did an ultrasound and the needle can't be it has to be like as far away from the baby as possible. So they did an ultrasound to see where she was inside of my stomach, and she was pretty far to the right side. So they put the needle on the left side, and she wasn't moving around too much, which was good. And so I didn't look when he stuck the needle in. It just kind of felt like a little bit of a sharp pain, nothing terrible. And I just looked at the ultrasound the entire time. And we were talking about something. I think they were talking about her moving. And I just started talking and telling them about how she doesn't move very often. She's pretty calm. And when my mom was pregnant with me, they had to do a stress test because I was the same way. I was just really calm and I didn't move around a lot. And as I was telling them this, anytime that I talked, she would move. I couldn't necessarily feel it, but I could see her moving on the ultrasound. And I don't know, it felt like a special moment to see her react to the sound of my voice. And it didn't take long, and then it was over with. And they gave me paperwork with, a number to call if anything were to happen, signs to look for just in case. and sent me on my way, patched me up, sent me on my way. And that was the amniocentesis test. So then again, it was just time to wait. I went home and we waited, and when we finally got the results back, it didn't take long. I think it was like a couple of days later. The counselor that we had talked to, she called us and she let us know that they did find 2 X chromosomes, full ones, through the amniocentesis test. So it wound up in the end that Ember doesn't have Turner syndrome. But the reason why I wanted to go over this again, because like I said, I have touched on it on my main channel, Leave Her Wild, is because a lot of people, I got a lot of mixed reviews. Like, there's a lot of women who also did amniocentesis tests while they were pregnant for one reason or the other. But there's a lot of people who feel like the doctors just want you to take that test, or the DNA test in general, to find out if there's something wrong with your baby, and then so they can advise you to abort it. And I think that that's why a lot of people are against the DNA testing, because in their minds it's, this is my baby and I don't care if there's any abnormalities. I will love them no matter what. And I think that is a beautiful thought. I nothing that I disagree with about that, but I feel like, to me, it wasn't about finding out that there was anything wrong or abnormal. It was finding out, if that were the case, what can I do to be, to be prepared, to prepare for any medical expenses that we're going to have to face, any procedures we're going to have to face. A lot of times, if babies make it to birth with Turner syndrome, they have to have immediate heart surgery. So say, for example, if she did have Turner's and we never got the test and we didn't know, the doctors wouldn't be as prepared when she was born for that emergency surgery, lessening her chances for survival. And there was a couple who I watched some videos on DNA testing and stuff. There was one couple who was against it for those reasons. They didn't care if there was anything abnormal. This was their baby and they love her no matter what. Well, she wound up having spina bifida, but they didn't know until it was time for her to start walking, and she wasn't walking, and she was then experiencing signs of it. But by then, there was only so much that they could do and this was what they talked about. Because I don't know a whole lot about spina bifida. My cousin's daughter has it, but I don't know a whole lot about it. But the point they made was, if they had done the DNA testing and they had known, maybe they could have made her life a little bit easier, and they could have prepared better for what was to come, because they didn't know that was wrong, what was wrong. And so they're trying to teach her how to walk, and she's in pain and they don't know why. And it was just hard for them to see that, which I totally understand. Like, I get that, especially after finding out, like, there is a reason behind that she couldn't, it wasn't like anything that they were doing, but it's just like, it's something that she was born with. And so for them to not be as prepared, they just talked about how, like, they were so against it. And then in the end, they realized that it could have been beneficial, because it didn't mean that they were going to abort their baby. It just meant that they could have been more well prepared. And so that's kind of the main point I wanted to make today, aside from our pregnancy scare story itself. is that I don't regret doing the DNA testing, and if I had the choice to do it over again, I would make the same decision and I would do the DNA testing, because it's better to be prepared to give your baby the best life that they could possibly have, no matter what challenges they're going to face, in my opinion. And obviously not everyone is going to agree with me that DNA testing, it can be beneficial, but I personally think that it can be something used for good, and it's not a tool to find out if there's any abnormalities and so that you can abort your baby. That's not the point of the DNA testing. There's so much more reason behind why it could be beneficial and a good idea to do it. So that is just my opinion. If you have a story that you would like to share about DNA testing or pregnancy scares that you've had, feel free to leave them in the comment section below so that others can read through them and I can read through them as well. And I think it really can let other people know that they're not alone in whatever they're going through, that there are people out there who understand. And it can be really dark and it can be really hard, but you are definitely not alone. And I think that there's so many people out there who judge and are quick to tell you why you're wrong or you're a terrible parent for making these decisions. But I had a lot of that, people who said that I was wrong for doing the DNA testing in general, because like I said earlier, people think that it's because the doctors are going to tell you to abort your baby. My doctor did not necessarily say that. She said that once I do the amniocentesis test, she was like, we'll talk about it and we'll figure it out from there, and we'll do whatever it takes. And if this is something that you don't want to basically, like, if this pregnancy isn't something that you want to further, I don't remember the exact words she said, but it was basically like, if you don't want to keep it, that's an option we can talk about too. But she didn't blatantly be like, your kid has this syndrome, and if so, we can abort it if you want. It wasn't like that at all. She was not encouraging that. She was just letting me know I do have options no matter what I believe or choose, but she wasn't necessarily like leaning toward that or anything. She slightly mentioned it in conversation, but the main point of the conversation was she's there to help in any possible way that she can with whatever we choose to do. And so it's not always about that. And I just hope that if you're struggling or you're thinking about it, if you're afraid of the DNA testing, it can be beneficial, and it's better to be more well prepared beforehand than finding out later and feeling guilty if you could have done something to help bring a better life to your child. So that is the point I wanted to make in today's video. I know this was a little bit more of a serious subject, and I just want to thank you guys for hanging out with me through this topic. And again, if you have anything to say, feel free to comment down below, and I will see you guys in an upcoming episode. I appreciate all of you so much, and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to continue on this podcast journey with me. I'll see you guys on maybe Wednesday. I don't know. We'll see. I'll see you guys on the next video.